Hi, and welcome to today's 5-in-1 Mayaani Talks. Let us talk about the elephant in the room, the backdrop to my video. Yes, for those of you who may not be aware, my family and I moved into our home about 8 months ago, and essentially what we purchased was a shell. So everything inside our house needed to be gutted. It was literally the home was in such a state it was considered uninhabitable. Essentially, uninhabitable is what we were told. So everything from the plumbing, the electrics, the entire internal walls, the floors, which were uneven, had to be leveled. Of course, we've got a septic tank as well, so we're not a mains drain. So a lot has gone in. We've invested a lot in bringing our home to where it is now. And of course, as many people will know, if you've renovated a home, the last finishing touch that's always typically left behind in most cases is the decorating. So I plan to change this all up for my studio and have a door. I want a glass door, actually, a black steel frame glass door behind me. But for now, this is what we have. So let's put that to the back of our mind if any of you have been curious and wondering. And let's move into today's beautiful video in which I share with you, and you are welcome to share anything you may know as well, or just your thoughts in general. It may not be related to this topic, it may be your ideas of topics you'd like me to explore. Whatever it is, I welcome you to share your thoughts too, but I share my thoughts and learning in relation to another beautiful bead embroidery technique from India. Of course, you may recall my previous video explored pearl embellishment. Today, we will explore together a beautiful technique that was inspired by pearl embellishment, and that technique, of course, is Moti Bharat. Now, fact number one, a beautiful fact unknown to me, despite being Gujarati in origin, I had never heard of this technique called Moti Bharat before while growing up in any of the circles around me, and I grew up in a close, tight-knit Gujarati community in Kenya for a period of my life, and of course moved to the UK, which is where my mum and I am originally from. We were all, and essentially never heard of this art form named Moti Bharat before. But I have seen it, particularly in weddings, or in terms of the ornaments that you see at wedding time. And Moti Bharat is a beautiful bead embroidery technique which originated in Gujarat, specifically Saurashtra, Kathiawad, and Kutch in Gujarat. So that's fact number one. Fact number two. Now, it kind of ties with fact number three, so forgive me if I overlap a little bit, but effectively, fact number two is roughly to do with the origins, of course, of this art form. Fact number three is about how it's women led. Now, as many art forms go, when they are typically art forms that just happen to be created within homes by women, and I have to stress that because unfortunately, a lot of what women have done historically has not been documented because it's not been considered valuable. And essentially, that's the case here. So, when it came to Moti Bharat art, this art form and technique evolved within homes. It was developed primarily by women. Women were the custodians of this art form. They wove all sorts of pieces with the Moti Bharat technique, whether it was jewelry, garments, ornaments for the house. All sorts was woven with this technique by women, and they wove it in their homes, primarily for their family members, to beautify their home spaces, to beautify themselves. And it typically involved the use of pearl-like materials, pearl glass seed beads, rather than the actual pearls themselves. And the Moti Bharat technique having evolved within homes was very much a technique passed from mother to mother or woman to woman, neighbor to neighbor. And as many of these techniques go, when they're of that kind of nature and there are no institutions or formal certifications you can receive in the technique or guilds that have been formed or royal patrons for this particular art form, then what tends to happen is they're undervalued, underappreciated, and therefore underrecorded. So when it comes to fact number two, the origins, when Moti Bharat actually came into existence is not entirely clear, but it's assumed it was somewhere between the late 19th century to the early 20th century. However, it may very well be older. And fact number three, I've already covered that briefly with you. It is a women-led form of art. It has always been female-led primarily. As far as we know, according to everything that we know about this art form, there has been no male control or influence over this art form. So it really was a beautiful creative outlet and is still a beautiful creative outlet for women to express themselves, particularly in communities where women's voices were not heard or they were, if anything, drowned out or subdued, not given their place, and essentially was considered unattractive for you to have an opinion as a woman. And that still remains the case in some cultures and societies around the world today, but I would hope that is changing with us recognizing that all of our voices are important, irrespective of our gender, irrespective of our background or our caste or creed or whatever you want to call it. every voice is important and valuable and adds something beautiful to this wonderful community of humans that we are. So, being women led, fact within that fact number three, I want to expand on it a little bit by just sharing how I speculate. And this is not necessarily documented, but I'm just speculating, having thought about where innovation comes from, because essentially Moti Bharat was a very creative solution, perhaps. It was definitely a creative innovation, creative technique, but perhaps it was a creative solution to the issue that some women faced of being unable to access pearl embellishment. Pearl embellishment, of course, was an art form that did have royal patrons. It was very much revered in the Mughal era in particular, and was mostly seen amongst regal circles, royalty, courtiers, noble individuals. That's because the pearls had material value associated with them. So, of course, for some women, pearls would remain inaccessible. They would be out of their reach. So, I wonder if Moti Bharat evolved as a creative solution for a group of women who wanted to be able to enjoy the beauty and opulence and air of sophistication, perhaps even associated with pearl embellishment, but found the pearl embellishment, of course, was out of their reach. And so, what did they do? They created a way for them to embrace and enjoy pearl embellishment in a form that was accessible to them, in the form known as Moti Bharat. And I welcome you to share whether you think this is possible too, because a lot of innovation, from what I have seen on the surface of it, tends to come out of either a desire and an inability to fulfill that desire, because maybe you don't have access to the resources that you need to do that, whether it's a monetary resource you don't have or the material resource you don't have, but it's lack of access to what you need to be able to achieve what it is you desire leads to innovation, or it's a dissatisfaction in what already exists that leads to innovation. So I'd love to welcome your thoughts on whether you think that was possible. Perhaps it was a creative solution that women came up with to support them to access this beautiful art form that otherwise was out of their reach. Fact number four, of course, when it comes to Moti Bharat, the beautiful thing about Moti Bharat is that it is essentially living heritage. What do I mean by that? Because Moti Bharat was not formal, it wasn't a formal skill that you learned, it wasn't institutionalized, there were no certificates because of all of that. What it meant was that a woman could simply pass this skill on to another woman just briefly. We're not talking about a woman actually watching a woman do it and okay, no, you're not doing it correctly. You haven't done that weave, that stitch correctly, that bead is not positioned correctly. None of that. Just literally an afternoon as friends, or perhaps mother to daughter or neighbor to neighbor, just having an afternoon together. One woman is now watching how the other woman weaves her magic using this Moti Bharat technique, and she simply goes away inspired and weaves her own magic using it. And essentially, because of that, each woman would have the freedom to write her own story, add her own twist, reimagine the technique in her own way. The beauty of that is that, of course, as you pass this skill down from generation to generation, each new generation reimagines it with attention to the kind of life that they're living, with the values they hold. And essentially, what you get from that is living heritage, where heritage is being honored because they're continuing the technique in a traditional sense, as far as, there's no specifics when it comes to the stitches, but essentially, this art form and what it weaves can be named Moti Bharat. You can identify as Moti Bharat. So it is identifiable. So they're sticking to that, honoring that voice, honoring that lineage, but they're not so restricted that they cannot actually make this art form that they're weaving relevant to their values and the lifestyle that they live. So essentially, the heritage is evolving and in that way remaining relevant. I think that's very important because a lot of pieces um, that we label as heritage, or a lot of techniques that we label as heritage, unfortunately, the reason why a lot of those heritage techniques and traditions die out is because they no longer stay relevant. So whilst they're beautiful and we feel some sort of connection with them because we have an ancestral lineage and ancestral bond to them, despite that, we don't see how those techniques or pieces, whatever works of art, pieces of jewelry, how they fit into our lives now. And because of that, because they don't fit into our lives right now, or perhaps hold the stories that we wish to pass on, or perhaps hold the values that we wish to continue to pass on, or the values that we ourselves hold, because of that, they fall out of being relevant. And once something is no longer relevant, it is still admired, but very much from behind a glass box, because essentially those sort of techniques and pieces end up in a museum. So to avoid Moti Bharat from becoming a museum held artifact, I think it's a beautiful question that comes to mind now about whether you feel that actually to honor Moti Bharat, rather than being so fixed on preserving the tradition and this heritage art form in exactly the way it was. I mean, obviously, we're gonna have to pick a time period. Go, okay, right? That's it. We consider that Moti Bharat. That's how we do it from now on. Because essentially this was an evolving art form anyway. But let's say we pick a particular time period. We decide this is authentic Moti Bharat. This is what it looks like. This is exactly how the pieces are put together. This is exactly how the beads look on this piece. If we're too rigid about the technique, and we want to honor that tradition at the same time, if we honor it rigidly, are we more at risk of therefore having that technique die out and fade away from existence and be simply something we see in a museum because we have not allowed it to evolve to become relevant to the culture we live in? I would love to welcome your thoughts. Of course, fact number 5 when it comes to Moti Bharat, it's interesting because I may have very well merged these facts together. So I'm briefly going to look at my notes here, but I'm just trying to think about what the fifth fact. Oh yes, fact number 5. Moti Bharat, because of the materials used in Moti Bharat, the beautiful thing about this particular technique compared to pearl embellishment, if we're to compare, is that this technique lends itself to be applied to materials that are much more sustainable. And the beautiful thing about that is that we can then not only honor our heritage and our lineage, evolve this technique so it's relevant and doesn't become, obsolete, but we can also use materials to weave with this technique, which are more sustainable, meaning that we can wear jewelry that feels a lot more in keeping with our values. And with the life that we're living now, and with the sort of stories we want to pass on to the next generation. And I think the other lovely thing, actually, another fact has come to mind. The other lovely thing about Moti Bharat is because there was no male control over Moti Bharat, and it literally was women's voices, women shaping pieces according to what they felt inspired to shape to a degree, because I cannot say for certain that they were not influenced by the luxury jewelry pieces they saw. But luxury jewelry, as we know in the traditional sense, was largely a male evolved concept, because until about the Industrial Revolution, luxury was very much a free for all, but then it was standardized that luxury jewelry just involves the use of precious gemstones and precious metals in certain quantities of them. And once that happened, of course, men became the primary custodians of the art form of making jewelry in the first place. So essentially, the luxury jewelry that we see today, a lot of it was designed by men for the male gaze, not by women to express themselves and to essentially honor each other through lived experience as a woman. But with Moti Bharat, I would say that there's definitely a degree of women simply just creating from their own creative voice, and in that way prepare or providing us with pieces of luxury that honor what it is to be a woman in a more soulful way, for want of a better word, more enriching, more empowering way, because it's a woman's view, a woman's gaze that has led to the designing of this piece of luxury for a woman. Of course, when a woman looks at a woman, there's a very different feel to women creating for women versus men creating for women. So yes, if you've enjoyed today, of course, first of all, I welcome you to answer the question that I proposed a bit earlier on. I also welcome you to share any of your thoughts, any thoughts that this particular video has encouraged you to, or has brought to mind. Or perhaps whether it's brought to mind any new insights and awarenesses that you didn't have, or whether actually it's just cemented in place things you already knew, and cemented in place things that you've already felt and known, and which are already making, having an impact on how you buy jewelry or invest in jewelry in your life. I'd love to know your thoughts either way. Of course, as always, remember, because your jewelry should always be more than just an afterthought, and you've got the subscription button, the like button if you enjoyed this particular video, and the notification bell if you wish to keep in touch. Thank you very much for joining me. As always, I'll be back again soon. Bye for now.